Hello, before we get started talking about how to set up your Ableton sets for optimum performance mode, I'd like to talk to you about a few general ideas that I usually adhere to while thinking about how to lay out a set for performance. So the first thing that I like to really underscore to people is that they should always start from scratch, okay? Start from scratch. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times I feel like people approach Ableton as if it's going to duplicate some other instrument that already exists. But I really encourage you to use the possibilities that Ableton has and really try to think about this about as if you're designing an entire new instrument when you're setting up a set for live performance. Don't try too much to think about how to incorporate an existing instrument that you use in a set into your set, because it might work, it might not work. And a lot of times I feel like we want to use Ableton for what Ableton is good for and not try to duplicate things that already exist. So when we're starting from scratch and we're actually designing an instrument, we get used to this idea that we're designing an instrument and that Ableton is its own instrument. And I definitely think that there's two principles that I like to talk about. So the first one is one that I kind of came up with, and it's the idea of instrument autonomy. Autonomy. And what I think of it with instrument autonomy is how much the instrument is going to do without your input. Okay, so I usually think about this as the kind of thing where we usually think about it kind of on this continuum, or we have, let's say, here's this continuum right here, and down here we have what, let's say, like the ultimate instrument that has the best reaction time, the most input from a person. Let's say it's a drum, right? I'm going to draw a little hand here. This is my hand. Sorry, this is not. And so when this hand hits the skin of a drum, it's like a djembe or some sort of, something you'll see at the farmer's market, maybe. Okay, so when this hand hits the djembe, you get some sort of brap sound. There's really, the instrument's not going to do anything unless you have very tactile input, right? And that's kind of how I think about it. This is the most reactive. And over here you might have the most autonomous, which would be, let's say, like turntables. Let's say this is supposed to be a record. I'm sorry, guys. Let's say we have a record playing, and there's going to be some input on your part. But for the most part, all of the musical sort of information that's happening is coming from the record, right? So you can just sort of press play, leave, and it's going to do everything by itself. So this is going to have the most autonomy, and over here with the drum, we're going to have the least autonomy. And now we might think of all other instruments as being somewhere in between here. So over here we'd have more percussion, and then maybe right in the middle we have something like the piano. The piano is going to be somewhat autonomous. Let me see. I'm sorry, I'm subjecting you guys to my bad drawing skills here. We have this piano that has all these keys, right? Wow, that's that's pretty bad. But this is clearly not my art, right? So we have a piano, and the piano is going to have some tactile input, but it's going to do a lot of stuff itself. I mean, like, you're not actually going in there and plucking the strings of the piano yourself. So that might be somewhere in the middle, and then somewhere over here you have something like, I'm not sure if you guys remember the auto harp, but something like the auto harp. And the auto harp was like a whole bunch of strings with buttons that would play different chords for you. So you don't actually have to go in there and finger the chords yourself, but if you press this button and strum these strings, then you would have a chord over here. So the idea is that you have to decide, when you're designing an instrument, how much autonomy you want that instrument to have. And usually I think a lot of people there's like a clear dichotomy for a lot of people. So there's the really reactive instrument like a drum, and then there's a extremely autonomous instrument like a DJ equipment or a DJ set, or kind of the stereotype that people have of electronic musicians is that we just press play on an MP3 and cruise out the room, right? So but we got to remember it's a continuum. So what you have to decide is, when you're designing the instrument, how much you want it to do. So if it's going to be like, if you're going to maybe have sort of like really classic MPC set, you might have it be over more towards this side, and clearly it's going to be more reactive because you're going to actually have to physically press all of the pads that you want to play, right? And if you're going to have something where you're kind of just triggering scenes, it might be over here. And usually you're going to want to have some sort of equilibrium between the two. So anyway, this is kind of just a kind of theoretical framework for you to think of the new instrument that you're designing. So definitely think about this as being a term that's really useful when designing an instrument. Now, another really important aspect that I like to think about when I'm designing a new electronic instrument is I like to think about the idea of interface optimization. Interface optimization. Okay? And what this means basically is that more is not more. Okay? So I think that a lot of times when people design electronic instruments, since there's very few hard limits you're going to reach. It's not like a guitar which will only have so many frets, or a piano which can have so many keys. Really, you can make an electronic instrument infinitely variable. You could really get to the absurdity where you're kind of like where everything that you would ever want to do in Ableton is available to you at all times. But I have this idea that the interface optimization, the interface is going to be limited to the useful aspects of the interface. So you're going to want to limit that, and part of the reason you want to limit it is that you got to really remember that you don't have that many ways to influence this this instrument. You have two eyes, right? And you have, remember how my stupid little hands look. Oh, your hands look probably better than mine. But so you have two hands, right? And then if you might have 10 fingers or something, and then if you are really crazy and you want to design some sort of foot control, you have two of those. But ultimately, there's a hard limit. There's really not that much you can watch, and there's not that much you can actually touch at one time. So you're going to really want to optimize and really think about what controls you're actually going to need at a given time, and think about how to lay them out in a way that is going to be useful so that you can have the parameters that you really want to affect, you can have them close together so you can use them at the same time, okay? So interface optimization is the process of making sure that your interface doesn't have too many things. So there's definitely a point of diminishing returns also. So like let's say you have this little graph right here, right? And down here you have the idea of, let's say, number of controls, right? Or let's just say generally call them number of knobs, right? And over here you have radness of music, let's say. And as this goes up, you're going to have some sort of increase in radness, and as we go across here, it's going to be an increase in number of knobs. And definitely, if you start with 0 knobs, you're not going to have very much radness in terms of your actual music. Radness is a very technical measure that I like to use to quantify how good my music is. So at some point, you're going to increase the amount of knobs, and your radness is going to go up. And maybe even at some point, it gets a lot better. But the thing is, like at some point, if you have some sort of instrument that looks like the cockpit of an airplane, you're not going to be able to use that much stuff, and it's going to result in confusion. You're not going to find what you're able to what you really want to use to make any music whatsoever. And at some point, if you have 1,000,000 knobs, it's going to be basically like watching someone at a switchboard. So the thing is like you have to realize that you have to find this sweet spot right where you want to be right in here, where you basically have the maximum amount of knobs that you can use to make totally rad music. And I call this totally rad peak. Like I said, this is a very technical denomination. So anyway, hopefully you guys can keep these ideas in mind as we work through, as I show you the different kinds of ways to optimize your performance setup. You can keep in mind these different aspects. Interface optimization, definitely interface optimization, instrument autonomy, and starting from scratch. Okay, so now that we have that kind of laid out and you've seen my awful drawing skills, let's go ahead and get started talking about ways to set up your performance setup in Ableton.